wholeheartedly to Michigan. We hope you enjoy your visit, and I would be remiss if I did not say, go Tigers, go Lions. The governor of the state of Michigan, Rick Snyder, was unable to be here today, but he wanted me to express his huge welcome and encourage you all to stay longer than the meetings, play, and enjoy Michigan. Governor Snyder is a big believer in our natural resources. In fact, at his inaugural State of the State address, he talked about Michigan's natural resources. And I know some of you get tired of me using the hand, sorry, and my Yooper friends up here. But we are in the heart of the Great Lakes. We are surrounded by the Great Lakes, with the exception of the very bottom of our mitten. And our natural resources are very important to us. In fact, Governor Snyder, in his first State of the State, said our natural resources are the economic engine of Michigan. So I think that will help you understand how important they are to us. For those of you who don't know, Governor Snyder was one of the former owners of Gateway. He ran for governor as the nerd. I know I said that in a meeting recently in Chicago and people looked at me, but it really is true. He ran as kind of an outside candidate with an unusual campaign, and he did really run as the nerd, didn't he, Brian? But he was elected with a very strong vote, and he is a person who does what he says he's going to do. It's amazing how many people come up to me and say, you know, he's doing exactly what he talked about when he campaigned. Yeah, he does. He is one of those who brings people together, works together, and then is about taking action, as Tim has for our words for us today in the next few days as we work here in Great Lakes Week. So working together and taking action is Governor Snyder's walking papers, is his mission, and he selected a wonderful candidate as Lieutenant Governor. Our Lieutenant Governor, Brian Calley, is someone that I got to work with before he was ever even Lieutenant Governor. He and I shared a district when he was in the House and I was in a Senate. We shared a county and we worked together. And during those few years of working with our now Lieutenant Governor, Brian Calley, I got to know him as a very strong, committed policymaker who does his homework. He cares about the state of Michigan. He cares about our Great Lakes region. He cares about our nation. He does his homework, and then he moves forward on policy. So we're very pleased to have him here today. He is the second youngest lieutenant governor in Michigan's history. And as I said before being elected, he served 2 terms in the Michigan House. During that role, he also served as minority vice chair of the House Tax Policy Committee, where he worked with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, which made him eminently qualified to help usher through our new business tax program in Michigan, which some of you I know have heard about because you've asked me about it. So with that, I'd like you to help me welcome Lieutenant Governor Calley to welcome us here to Detroit and to talk a little bit about Michigan. And I hope you'll take the opportunity to talk with him if you have that opportunity today and find out what a great policymaker he has been and will continue to be. Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation and for the introduction, Patty. And it's great to have you all here. I wanted to start, first of all, by saying thank you for the leadership role that the Commission played on implementation piece by piece of the Great Lakes Compact. And that was not an easy process to get. It's hard enough to get the policymakers in one state on the same side or same page on something, but to get 8 states and 2 provinces together on a project as big as that is really something that we should all be very proud of. And it happens to be that those who ushered that policy through are both now represented on this commission, Patty Burkholz in the Senate and Senator Warren, who was in the House at the time, those who were charged with getting a very divisive political situation and climate to agree on the words of the compact, and Michigan being the last piece of that puzzle to come together. So really proud of the work that those two did together in making it happen. Now, as we move forward, you probably have noticed, I look around and see the representation with the states and the provinces here, that we're all facing very similar challenges. We all have similar reliance on the Great Lakes, similar concern regarding things such as invasive species, also grappling with huge policy issues with respect to the development of our economies. And I notice around that with our friends, for example, in Ohio and Wisconsin, that there were times when you guys enjoyed really big crowds of people hanging out in the front yard of the Capitol, just like we had in Michigan a few times. As we go through these big issues, these big changes that we face, I have one of the benefits of being a little less recognizable than, say, our governor. They spent $10 million on his face and $0 on mine, so I can usually walk through a crowd without too much notice, and including right through the crowds of people sometimes at the Capitol. Now, I was speaking to a group in Jackson, Michigan, which is just south of Lansing, on the same subject I'm going to talk to you about in just a few minutes. And of course, everything that we do these days comes with a certain measure of controversy, because they're hard choices in front of us, and all of them come with a certain amount of apprehension by some, and change is difficult. But as I went to talk about this project to establish a better connection between Southeast Michigan and Windsor, Ontario, a bridge, it was advertised in the newspaper I was going to be there, and so a couple folks showed up, and they set up kind of a makeshift booth there, and it had a sign on it. It said, "Sign your petitions here to recall Governor Snyder." And you've heard there's a lot of these recall action going on, just like Wisconsin here, Michigan, all around the country these days. So as I walked by, the lady with the clipboard says, "Sir, would you like to sign a petition to recall Rick Snyder?" And as I walked by, I said, "No, I don't think so." And I thought, well, wait, they obviously don't know who I am. So I came back and I said, "Hey, I wonder if you guys have thought about what would happen if you were successful." And the guy next to her says, "Yeah, we'd throw that bum out of office. That's what would happen." I said, "Well, yeah, that's what would happen." But you realize then after that, then the lieutenant governor becomes the governor. And I wondered, do you like him better or something? Like, do you think he's more in line with you? Do you even know who he is? And the guy didn't miss a beat. He goes, "Well, he couldn't be any worse. I know that." So I told the governor after that, I said, "Sorry, Rick, the people want me. I don't know what to tell you." And so I said, the guy said he couldn't be any worse. I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe he could be worse." I said, "Listen, I know the lieutenant governor. In fact, I know him so well, I know how he thinks. And I got to tell you, you would not like him any better." And by the way, I'm Brian Calley, lieutenant governor. It's nice to meet you. I didn't wait for an answer. I just went inside at that point. It's a sign of the type of difficulties that we face today. The choices are hard. The choices that are faced by our friends in Canada and those in the states in our region, this transition that we've had from an economy so dependent on manufacturing to where we stand today, to what potential and hope that lies in our future, is something what comes with it is such difficult choices, but then also opportunities. And so we looked at the strengthening of the relationship between Michigan in particular, but for this discussion, let's talk about the whole Midwest, because the Midwest really does have the same stake that Michigan does with the relationship that we enjoy, trade relationship that we enjoy, and the friendship, long-term friendship with Canada. And so as we look at it on a nation-to-nation basis, these two countries enjoy the largest trade relationship of any two nations on planet Earth, by far. beyond that, Michigan enjoys the largest of all the states' trading relationships with Canada, and a roughly equal trade relationship between the nation and our state. 34 other states also share a similar relationship with Canada as their largest trade partner. And so as we look at what is the next step, what are the barriers to proper development of economies that have such a rich history in being intertwined together and successful. In fact, this region you could credit with the invention of the American middle class, and that's here, that's where it started. And yet, there's obstacles and barriers to growth or taking advantage of the relationship that has developed over the course of the last 100 years. And so what are some of those obstacles? As we look, transportation is a major obstacle today. In Southwest Michigan, Southeast Michigan, 99% of the commercial traffic goes over a bridge, the Ambassador Bridge. Our friends from other states may not realize this. The Ambassador Bridge is actually one of 2 privately owned border crossings in the world. There's another one between the border of the United States and Canada that's also privately owned, but essentially used by only one company who has a forest on one side and a mill on the other side of the crossing. But this is the only commonly used privately owned border crossing in the world. It's 83 years old. It's narrow. It's never been redecked. It won't last forever. And it carries 99% of the commercial traffic through the busiest trade corridor on the entire American-Canadian border crossing. It is a huge risk that we face today, shared roughly equally by our nation and Canada. And so as we look at the various reasons to move forward on this, part of it is simply economic security. That we would like to create an environment conducive to job growth where there is capacity sufficient to handle the type of trade trends that we see occurring. But beyond that, we have, or I should say in addition to that, we have substantial challenges. As you can imagine, if you controlled 99% of the trade traffic, the busiest crossing between the two largest trade partners in the world, that the one who holds the monopoly on that would not take very kindly to the idea of there being potentially competition at the border. And so there is right now underway a very substantial, so far, $5 million public ad campaign by the owner of the Ambassador Bridge to stop the opportunity that comes with an additional crossing between Detroit and Windsor. An ad on TV which calls it the bridge to nowhere. Now, I've been to Windsor and it's not nowhere. In fact, Windsor and Detroit manufacturing economies are intertwined. It's basically one manufacturing system on either side of the Detroit River. And so the proposal that we have put on the table works roughly like this. The Michigan legislature is being asked to create an authority, a bridge authority. We have a lot of experience with bridge authorities here in the state of Michigan, modeled somewhat after how we set up the Mackinac Bridge Authority. Gubernatorially appointed, confirmed by the Senate. These members would join together with our friends in Canada and develop the specifications of a concessionaire agreement for a public-private partnership. That public-private partnership would simply be put out to bid for a private concessionaire to come in and finance, design, build, and run a new crossing between Detroit and Windsor without any obligation or risk to the taxpayers in Michigan, without any obligation or risk, frankly, for the taxpayers in Canada, but for a very generous offer by our friends in Canada to cover the cost of connecting I-75 to the bridge in Michigan. See, there's a major deficiency in our current border crossing. That major deficiency is that there is no freeway-to-freeway connection. This leads to a pollution problem, an air quality problem, in an area that already has an extremely high concentration of industrial activity. 8,000 commercial trucks every single day go across, every single weekday, go across the Ambassador Bridge. Between the hours of 2 and 7 p.m. every night, it's very common for there to be hours-long delays and large trucks sitting there idling because we have a crossing which does not allow for a freeway-to-freeway connection. When you get off the freeway in I-75 in Michigan till you get on the 401 in Canada, there are 7 miles and 18 traffic signals. The largest bottleneck, the most substantial bottleneck in the entire Pan-American freeway system. There's no example of a commercial corridor in this state that it suffers through a bottleneck as substantial as that one. And so the proposal at hand would not only utilize the private sector to finance, design, and manage the bridge for the next 50 years, but it would also establish a freeway-to-freeway connection, an end-to-end border solution, a plaza which is designed to handle post-9/11 border inspections. Unlike the plaza today, retrofitted from decades ago in order to handle an operation it was never meant to handle. In fact, our friends in Canada, the way that it works, secondary inspections, these are the ones that you have to look closer at. These are the inspections that need to be go through a more exhaustive process. Well, that's 2 miles away from the border plaza. And so they're faced with saying, you have to promise you'll go and stop, which is a situation that we'd never allow to exist on this side of the border, and therefore why should we expect our friends in Canada to suffer through the same indefinitely? And therefore, the border crossing that we are proposing will not only prevent the problem with backups and endless idling, but would also provide the redundancy in our system needed today to protect us from the economic risk, from the terrorism risk, and frankly from the weather risk of short-term shutdowns at our border, which would be catastrophic to all the economies represented around this commission. And beyond that, would finally achieve that freeway-to-freeway connection, allowing the mutually beneficial trade relationship between these two greatest trade partners in the world to flourish as we all know that it can. One other opportunity I'll point out. Anybody knows anything about shipping or has any experience of shipping out of this country, out of the United States of America, knows that the capacity on the east coast and the west coast of our ports is such that it's very difficult to get anything through, the expense and the time required. Canada's made substantial investments in ports on both sides of that country, on the east and the west, which Americans could make good use of in order to get products that are made in both of our countries from here out to the world that wants to buy them. Our attitude is simply this. We have all been the victims of international trade for long enough. And so it is our time right now to take our rightful piece of it. It's our opportunity together to create a border solution that allows the intertwined nature of our two economies to grow together, because we know growing together it will be substantially more successful than what we can do separate. let me end it right there so that I can take an opportunity to take some questions. This might be a brand new concept to some of our friends around it. And it's a little awkward having Michigan next to New York right now, by the way, as we have Game 3, Tigers down 2-0. Or I'm sorry, we're now to Texas, but yeah, it's sorry guys, but we're just having a good time in Detroit right now. So, any questions from commission members? I'm the last guy between your break I saw on the agenda, so. Yes, sir.
So where? First of all, I think it's a tremendous project. You did a great job selling it, so I'm sold. Unfortunately, that doesn't close the deal. What are some of the major obstacles between where we're at now and obviously the owner of the Ambassador Bridge is not in favor of the project. I would assume or hope that most of the business community on both sides of the border are embracing that. So what do you see as the significant stumbling blocks from closing the deal?
Really, it's the resources of one billionaire. Sad as that is to say or to admit that is the obstacle or the roadblock that we face today. I have never seen a single issue get as substantial across the board business and labor support from across the political spectrum for something like this to happen, and yet now up to $5 million that has been spent in a very misleading advertising campaign. Just to give you an example, the ad campaign says, well, Michigan taxpayers are going to have to subsidize this bridge $100 million a year, which is not true. Where they get the $100 million a year is they take a very large freeway project, the Essex Parkway project in Canada, which is about a $1.4 billion project. And they assume in their study that the bridge, because that connects to the bridge, that the bridge tolls would have to pay for that $1.4 billion project. That's not true. It's just a Canadian freeway project. That'd be like me saying that the bridge has to pay for I-75 in Detroit or I-96 simply because those two interstates connect to the bridge. So that's the sort of misleading information. And people see something on TV, you want to believe that there's a certain amount of integrity involved or some amount of truth to it, and unfortunately, there isn't. There's only really one true thing in those ads where it says paid for by the International Bridge Company. Other than that, it's a stretch at best and outright lies at worst. But the number of resources behind that message is so substantial that it's having an impact and slowing down the process. Others?
I have a question. How did you get Canada to pay for a highway project in Michigan?
Oh, well,
and do you have anything that, Canada, if you want to pay for something in upstate New York, we'll be glad to give you a few items.
There is a history to this. I'm glad you asked that question because it's come up in Michigan many times. People just wonder, why would the Canadians do this? Why would they cover the cost of the Michigan side build-out, the interchange connection and the plaza to connect this particular border area? Now, of course, Canada, across the political spectrum, the general public seems to have a much better understanding of the magnitude of the reliance that Windsor in particular and that region, but Canada has on trade with Michigan and trade with the United States. It's an understanding that seems to be much deeper than what it's penetrated here on this side of the border. But I also will say, though, that there is a precedent for this. When the original Blue Water Bridge was built, and that's a bridge to the north of the proposed site, that it was Michigan that paid for the build-out on the Canadian side of the bridge. And Michigan waited for the tolls of the bridge to pay it back for the investment made on the Canadian side of the freeway. These are just two friends enjoying a relationship that has quite a history to it. And at this point, frankly, I don't perceive it to be much of a risk because I believe so much in the need and what the utilization of the bridge will be, that the tolls will eventually pay Canada back for the investment. So on the one hand, it's a very generous offer. On the other hand, frankly, I don't think it presents all that much risk. Sir.
Yes, sir. One more follow-up comment, if I may. I represent the U.S. flagships on the Great Lakes, and having reviewed the bridge permits, we had some issues that we made the Coast Guard aware of with the Ambassador Bridge, and having reviewed the Michigan permit, we thought it was very well engineered, and it was not a problem to a navigation perspective. So obviously, from our perspective, we're lockstep with you, and we appreciate the fact that the navigation interests would still be able to access Rouge Steel Plant, and whoever was doing the work on your side did a nice job of including ours in the discussion.
It's the importance of the location that was selected on both sides of the border is that it allowed for the plaza areas and the bridge engineering itself to accommodate really all the various interests. There aren't very many places that work for both sides along the Detroit River. Clearly, a new bridge at the site of the Ambassador Bridge does not work for the Canadians. It's already a very congested, overutilized area with no room for expansion. You're going to take out downtown Windsor or a historic neighborhood or the University of Windsor in order to accommodate this size of a project, not really a very reasonable proposition. But the same could be said for just the attributes of the river itself and making sure that you have a structure at a location that allows for the safe passage of vessels moving forward. Long term, we look at the intermodal transportation opportunities in connecting all of these aspects of surface transportation, water transportation, along with a pretty substantial rail line system that runs through the area and an international airport, that it presents a great opportunity for logistical type jobs to develop in this region. So if you're part of that shipping industry, then you'd be a part of the long-term plans of what the potential for this project really holds for the Midwest.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much. Really appreciate your thoughts and taking some time to spend with us. And we appreciate the leadership of Governor Snyder on all the issues important to the Commission and the Commissioners on both sides of the border. I also want to recognize Bill Carr is here from the province of Ontario. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming here. And also Rebecca Warren from the great state of Michigan. We really are lucky to have these Michigan state senators show up. You know, Patty Burkholz, Rebecca Warren, I think Lana Pollock was in the Senate as well. And there's something about that, the women in the Michigan Senate that gets them involved and make things happen. Okay. Now, with that, we're going to be taking a short break now. We're going to reconvene at 2:45. But however, before we break, I ask that and invite our official observers to who wish to make a statement today, and I encourage them to do so, to please see David Knight. David, if you'd wave everybody. Hey, Dave, of the Commission staff. We very much look forward to hearing from all of you. And because of the large turnout at this session, we ask, if at all possible, to limit your remarks to 4 minutes. Dave will give you instructions when you see him, and we'll start up at 2:45 sharp with our next keynote address. Thank you.